Video 2. Same outfit, different topic. My name is Sam, if you're new. I don't know if you would, maybe you are. This is Shadow Harvest, witchy, pagan, journally, babbly place. Yes. Anyway, I have a latte, and today I wanted to talk about a specific book that is non-witchy related, but then became witchy related with like my epiphanies I was kind of having all about it. This wonderful concept kind of came from the lovely Thorn Mooney, has talked, I think it was either TikTok or YouTube, I'm pretty sure she's brought it up multiple places, about why it's important to read outside of what could be considered in the occult how-to genre or witchy books, or you know what I mean, because when you go outside of that, especially if you go into like historical books or anthropological stuff, any of that type of thing can help, especially if you're a pagan and attempting to maybe recreate or learn more about the people of old who did these types of things. And I didn't start reading this book with that trajectory in mind, but it kind of became about that and became interesting to me because of things I started learning, and specifically how this book was structured. So the book that I'm speaking of is very random. It's Americo. Basically, this man is talking about the weird explorer who was similar to Columbus, and he's the guy that we named the continents, America, Southern and Northern, after. Basically, he's like the lesser known Columbus. And we all know that Columbus was problematic. This man is also very problematic. Problematic people. And this book was fascinating and made me question a lot of things for a pagan historical perspective for two reasons. One, the concept of who is the experts and why have we named them an expert in any field. Two ways that this is brought up in this book. One is in the very beginning, it talks a lot about the source material that we actually have for Americo's journeys, any sort of journals, you know, actual first person evidence, and how so many of them he contests in a lot of ways, where other biographers or historical people, scholars, look at it and say, yes, that is for sure like of his hand. He says, this could be a forgery. This source item seems suspect, and here are the reasons why for that. When I am consuming historical stuff, when I am looking at certain things, I don't necessarily have the background and the knowledge whether or not to determine 100% whether something is true or not, and so to constantly keep that as a grain of salt, where this could be very much contextualized by someone's opinion in their field, right? So even he is a very strong opinion, and I have to go, well, the author of this book, which is Felipe Fernandez Armesto. He also might be entirely wrong, and there's probably a lot of debate over any of the things that he believes about which source materials are actually accurate about Americo's life. The second thing when questioning experts about things actually came quite a bit later in this biography, when they were talking about how Americo had his little longitude and latitude. Us especially, it's now like, oh, of course, longitude, latitude. People use that all the time. That's how people get around now. Like, it's basically him guessing. You could not follow the method that Americo, or I guess Columbus even, used to get across. They were not responsible, and the only reason they even made it across in so many ways is because there were captains of the boats who actually knew what the hell they were fucking doing. And even if they discouraged the captains in their journals, and said that this silly seamen don't know what they're talking about. So these men have actually done maybe smaller voyages, whether to like Greenland or in other places before, but they were not considered the experts. Why? Because these were the people, Americo especially, was apparently the people who got to get into court and convince the king and the queen, and these were the people in power who decided who the experts were. And that then made me go, huh. Especially when I think people are exploring more different stuff. It was like, who was in control of, with the old stuff being so suppressed when it comes to paganism, witchcraft, the occult, because who was in power? The church, or I mean, the church. I mean, who else? Really? And then who are the people that came of power later? Gerald Gardner, the Wiccan stuff, you know, all these things came up. It really does make me then, again with a grain of salt, but questioning who is determining who the experts are on a topic. Magic, the old traditions. All of these things, I think in so many ways, we like read a simple 101 occult book, and because again, you know nothing, you don't know what to question. But as I'm gaining more knowledge, I've now been practicing for 6-7 years-ish of practicing witchcraft and taking in all this knowledge for so long, where I can now start questioning certain things, poking into what was the political assumptions of going along with this level of thing. And then on top of that, what is the thing that gets written down as the correct history, the validated source? Who decides that? That is such an interesting question, and especially with so much lost information, unfortunately, I think it's really hard to discern. This book was super fascinating on that front, and just to him kind of picking apart all the different ways where America was just, quite honestly, a little bit of a bumbling buffoon. He was a great salesman and little else. So also the way that the continents got actually named after him was again a bumbling attempt. It was basically that a bunch of publishers were rushing to publish the next great map, and someone found one of those, I believe it's called the Sardini letter, which I could be entirely wrong about that, so don't quote me on that. Which European made it there first? They were contesting over that, but because they were just rushing to publish the map so first, they just put down America. They thought he was the first person to get there, and then later that was contested. They tried to take the map back, but it was too widely distributed. And now it's just, yes, that's why. Basically a publishing mistake is why these continents are known as North and South America. Which is super fascinating to me, that a mistake is now why these things are done. A rush of publication. We had to be first to put the new map out for everyone to see. We couldn't let these other places do it first. Like, that's the reason why. Okay. What is something that is rushed, a mistake that was overlooked and done, and now it gets away from people, and now it's a thing. Now that's the reason why we do the thing, even if it is actually inaccurate. How often does that happen? Especially when information can't necessarily be solidly confirmed when it comes to like paganism and occult, all that stuff. The thing that was super fascinating actually was the maps, and kind of going on to like the publishing of this map, and then how they made maps and how maps were seen as different. I'm reading from chapter 4, the Spellbinder's books. So it says, corrupted source bedevils the history of exploration. More than any other kind of history, the genre depends on maps and autobiographical narratives, documents particularly prone to distortion, misrepresentation, emendation, and forgery. The structure of the book and map trade favors modern forgers who have made fortunes by cunning falsifications. The Vinland map purportedly a 15th century record of the Norse Atlantic crossing, deceived some of the leading authorities when it first came to light. Yale University spent an undisclosed fortune to acquire it. Its provenance is unverifiable, and its form inconsistent with every genuine no-cartograph product of the period. The case of Columbus has generated some of the most spectacular and silly scams of all time, including a logbook he supposedly wrote in English, which appeared mysteriously just in time for the vendor to cash in on the 400th anniversary of Columbus's first voyage. The fact that it was headed "My Secret Logbook" did not stop the publisher who handled it from producing an edition on imitation parchment, bound in imitation sheepskin, a map of Hypsila, supposedly from Columbus's own hand, which the Duchess of Alba bought at the same time as the logbook scam, has continued to appear as an illustration in most picture books about the Admiral ever since, in sublime indifference to the fact that it was forged. Along the series of forgeries purported to be manuscripts of Columbus' first account in the New World were already in circulation. So this is like the most fascinating thing, the idea that like maps themselves were known to be like a map really. But if you think about it, like it's not like we have the satellites and Google Maps back in the day. Like, this is entirely up to interpretation, personal interpretation. And if like, who's gonna go and make the voyage to go check if the man who'd actually been to the place was doing it right? You know what I mean? Like, that is something where it's like, who's checking this stuff? We don't know. Medieval travel books, which again talks about the different genres, different areas that so many ancient people came from, right? The tradition hollowed the sirens and the sources. Tradition hollowed distortion. Medieval travel books are hardly complete without what the readers, writers, and publishers called mirabilia, prodigies, monsters, enchantments, fabulous people and places, freaks of climate and typography. This is especially true from the 12th century onward. Paradoxically, perhaps, the revival of the classic learning restored faith in monsters, with Greek and Roman writers celebrating. And so that is very interesting to me, how this could apply to myths, mythological creatures, how medieval travel people are saying, we saw these things, is like, that's part of their, like, I saw it first documentation. Who saw it? When did we see it? From what region? How much of it is it? It's interesting to me how this is a revival of the Greek and Roman times. So how often are people hearing the myths of the Greeks and the Romans and then putting it on a place where it doesn't necessarily belong? Or maybe they hear a local folklore and tale and then they merge the two, so it's not necessarily true to that specific tradition. Finally, it is vital to remember that writing on sea comes soaked in its own traditions, in which the ocean is a divine arena where fortunes change with the wind, and the stars, according to astrological lore, are divine messengers. It is not that seafarers are particularly unreliable in reminiscence. Everyone's memory is an impure medium. Whenever we record or retrieve memories of real experience, the fire of the synapses brands our brain with extraneous images from art and letters. The flood of proteins washes in exaggerations and errors from the outside. And we tend to fuse what really happened to us with what we have read or dreamed or heard. That happened to Vespucci. When he related his experiences, he filtered them through his readings. The idea that, oh, so the Greeks and the Romans, their culture, their myths, their philosophy was all coming up again during this time when everyone's exploring. It's becoming a major part of the cultural digest. So how does that influence everything? What are they putting on the tales and explorations? And then with sea folk and their own superstitions, like, that's just gonna bring up something else entirely. It's a book not at all about paganism or witchcraft or the occult. It's a book about a man who, quite honestly, was an entire hot mess and somehow found himself into some sort of famous nonsense that we've named entire continents after him. And I do enjoy how much the author of this book tears this man apart. That is thoroughly enjoyable. But I think what I got the most out of it was all the different ways that we can question these older bits, like, just because it is enshrined in history, recognizing to peel back and to say, yes, this is factual. Is it? I think it's always important to question these things, to peel them apart a little bit. I don't know, that constant questioning is fascinating to me, and that all came about from reading this dang thing. Who knew? It was not supposed to be a pagan read. It was not supposed to influence me in any way, shape, or form on that front, and yet it did. So, what random ass book have y'all read that have made you rethink some things about maybe the historical olden days of paganism or about your magic? Any of that? Leave that in the comments down below. I'm always fascinated by what random book or something that has nothing to do with a spiritual context then invades your spiritual life. Like, it seems to come at you from out of nowhere in a sense. And how has that then expanded your idea of what you do in your practice or what you take in as knowledge? All of that in the comments down below. Anyway, new videos are continuing to come. As you can see, we shall be filming more and more and more. And I shall see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.